This is a ceasefire document from World War I that belonged to the guest's father. It is a note dated November 11, 1918, the day the armistice was signed to cease hostilities. The note is timed at 9:10 a.m., 1 hour and 50 minutes before the official cessation of hostilities. The document essentially states,
She seemed like that to us when she was babysitting.
Well, it's a note dated November 11th, 1918, the day that the armistice was signed to stop hostilities.
Although the hostilities were set to end at 11 a.m., this marked only the beginning of the end of the war, not its conclusion. Following this, it was up to the politicians to negotiate the formal terms of peace. The instructions in the note were critical. If German forces continued fighting after 11 a.m., Allied troops were prohibited from retreating.
So if the Germans kept fighting after 11 o'clock, they could not move back. They had to stay exactly where they were.
They were required to maintain their positions as per the directive. These notes would have been distributed to all company commanders by their superior officers, providing clear instructions on how to manage the transition to the ceasefire. While many such documents were likely issued at the time, very few have survived to this day. Given the historical significance, content, and date of this document, a conservative auction estimate would range from
We would put an auction estimate conservatively of $800 to $1,200 and could do better at auction given the content and his service.
Oh, I see.
The individuals in the picture are the guest's grandfather and brother. They enlisted in the Marines together during World War I. From the uniform, it's evident that he served in the Marine Corps. He is wearing a 1917 pattern forest green wool Marine Corps service coat. The coat features Marine Corps Eagle, Globe and Anchor collar insignias, which were not standard for all uniforms. By examining the shape of his shoulder sleeve insignia, it is clear that he belonged to the 6th Marines. Additionally, the color of the felt background indicates he was part of the supply company within the 6th Marines. His Veterans of Foreign Wars (VFW) hat displays his World War I Victory Medal, as well as his Marine Corps Good Conduct Medal. The helmet he wore is actually a British helmet. When turned upside down, the chin strap lugs can be seen to be attached with split rivets, a key detail identifying it as British-made.
After experimenting around with a bunch of different things, we ended up settling on just adopting the British-style helmet.
While the United States manufactured helmets, they also purchased a substantial number from the British. The Marine Corps Eagle, Globe and Anchor insignia has been affixed to the helmet through a hole punched in the front. A distinctive feature of authentic World War I helmets is the method used to attach this insignia.
The reproductions, they tend to be very careful with the helmet, and they'll drill that hole and insert the insignia and attach it.
Marines during World War I would simply punch a hole using a hammer and attach the insignia without precision. The front of the helmet is painted with the supply company's 6th Marines insignia, along with the Marine Corps Eagle, Globe and Anchor symbol. This set is a remarkable and complete archive of his service. It includes the uniform, which, despite some moth damage, remains a wonderful example of a Marine Corps coat. Accompanying the uniform are his ID tags, discharge documents, and other items that collectively tell the story of his service. Most World War I uniforms aren't particularly valuable, as a significant number still exist. For instance, a typical World War I Army uniform without insignia might sell for $50 to $60 at most. However, Marine Corps items are far more sought after and command higher prices. This set, due to its completeness and historical significance, would retail for between
$2,500 and $3,000.
Wow. That's very exciting. Thank you.
An avid collector of World War I memorabilia brought in a fascinating document related to a man named Barnum. He was reportedly the company clerk for an ordnance company undergoing training at Camp Hancock, Georgia. As the company clerk, his primary responsibility was to maintain all official records. Among the items presented was a morning report, which documented the number of men in the unit and their specific activities on a given day. There was also a payroll roster, as well as a diary Barnum kept during his time at Camp Hancock in June of 1918. While it may have seemed like an ordinary company at first glance, it was actually remarkable. This unit included 7 future Hall of Famers, 3 of whom were among the first 5 players ever inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame.
We've got Christy Mathewson as the officer of the company. Big Six, one of the greatest pitchers of all time. Then you have Honus Wagner, another one of the all-time greats.
The company's officers were Christy Mathewson, also known as Big Six, one of the greatest pitchers of all time. Alongside him were Honus Wagner, another legendary player, and Ty Cobb. Other Hall of Famers in the company included Max Carey, Frank Chance, Ed Walsh, and Frank Home Run Baker. At Camp Hancock in 1918, these men trained to work with ordnance, focusing on tasks such as defusing bombs, handling explosives, and managing heavy weaponry.
There to work with ordnance, to defuse bombs, handling of explosive, handling of heavy weapons, that kind of thing.
Chemical warfare.
Some chemicals, yes.
Several members of the unit served in Europe, including Christy Mathewson, who was tragically exposed to mustard gas during his service. This exposure ultimately contributed to his death in the 1920s. The document, originally purchased for about $30, is a rare piece of history. Its estimated value is between.
I think it's probably worth somewhere in the range of $2,000 to $3,000, and at auction, I think it would probably go for more because it is unique.
This is a wing that once belonged to the guest's great-uncle, who served in World War I. He was part of the 19th Balloon Company in the Aero Squad and was the youngest pilot at the time of his passing. He tragically died while in service at Langley Field in 1921. Balloon wings were a rare distinction granted to only a select group of individuals. The primary purpose of these wings was to elevate pilots above the battlefield to observe enemy movements, direct artillery fire, and relay critical information back to command.
This particular pattern wing, some people call it a balloon pilot wing. I believe the technical term, it's a military aeronaut wing. It was introduced in 1919.
This specific pattern of wing, often referred to as a balloon pilot wing, is officially called a military aeronaut wing. It was introduced in 1919 and only remained in use until 1921. The markings on the back indicate that this piece was part of the very first batch produced at the Philadelphia Mint.
Such a small little sliver of time and such a very limited number of them that were manufactured conspire to make it very rare.
Because of its brief production period and the limited number manufactured, this wing is exceedingly rare and highly valuable. Its retail value today is estimated to be between.
Figure on this today would be between $2,500 and $3,000.
Oh my God, are you kidding me?
Purchased as a memento during World War I, this wristwatch originally belonged to the owner's grandfather. The watch was likely manufactured in 1915. Before the First World War, it was quite rare for gentlemen to wear wristwatches. Men typically carried pocket watches, as the idea of wearing a piece of jewelry was generally frowned upon. However, when the war began, soldiers in the trenches and on the battlefield discovered the impracticality of using pocket watches during combat.
And the idea of a man wearing a piece of jewelry was very much frowned upon. It was only really when the war started that they found in the trenches and in combat.
To solve this, they devised a method to strap their pocket watches onto their wrists. This watch is a classic example of how manufacturers adapted to that innovation. Essentially, it is a pocket watch that has been modified to be attached to a leather strap, with a protective guard placed over the dial.
Most enamel dials were made in white. The black, obviously anti-reflective, and much better for nighttime and far less chance of being seen from that point of view.
Another feature influenced by the wartime environment is the black enamel dial. While most enamel dials of the time were white, the black finish was chosen for its anti-reflective properties, making it more practical for nighttime use and reducing the risk of detection. Interestingly, the box advertises that the watch contains radium.
And it really wasn't harmful to individuals. The harmful part was to the poor people that were painting the dials.
Although the radium has since aged to a brown hue, it originally emitted a bright glow, allowing the watch to be visible in the dark. While the radium posed no immediate danger to the wearer, it tragically caused harm to the workers who hand-painted the dials.
I've heard that story before.
Write the numerals, and then at the end of each one, look again back into the radium. Very, very dangerous.
This particular wristwatch remains in excellent condition. Its historical significance lies in the fact that it is one of the earliest examples of a wristwatch ever made. Additionally, its original box has been preserved, which further adds to its value. If offered at auction today, this remarkable piece could fetch a price of approximately.
Value-wise, if it were to sell at auction today, you'd be looking at a number around $1,000.
I'm pleasantly surprised considering that the price on the box is $4.50.
This group focuses on Charlie Trinket, the guest's great-uncle, who was killed in 1917 while serving as a pilot in the Lafayette Escadrille. The Lafayette Escadrille was the name of the French Air Force Unit N124 during World War I. It consisted largely of American volunteer pilots flying fighter aircraft and was active from 1916 to 1917. In 1915, Trinket decided to enlist in the French Air Corps to assist the French in their fight against the Germans.
He started, I believe, in 1915. He was with a bunch of friends in New York City, and they decided that they would go over and enlist in the French Air Corps to help the French against the Germans.
He was accepted as a pilot, but served for only about 6 months. Many young men in the United States were enthusiastic about the events unfolding in Europe and eager to contribute. Some enlisted in Canada, while others joined the forces in England.
which is a very exciting thing. Not too many people serve in the French
didn't know
Foreign
that.
Legion.
The history of Charlie Trinket's service extends beyond the Lafayette Escadrille. He fought in the trenches during the harsh winter of 1914 to 1915, and later applied for flight training in 1917. After being accepted, he was promoted to sergeant and assigned to the Lafayette Escadrille. One fascinating artifact associated with his story is a trench art shell.
Is this trench art shell. A trench art, of course, is an art form in the time where people are making decorations on military shell.
Trench art refers to the decorations made on military items such as shells, canteens, and bullets by soldiers, often as keepsakes. This particular shell is notable for its connection to the French Foreign Legion. Another intriguing artifact is an item that, when viewed from the front, displays his French Foreign Legion affiliation. When turned, it reveals a depiction of Trinket in uniform. Further rotation highlights his service locations, including Champagne, where he was wounded in 1914, 1915, and 1916 during his time with the Foreign Legion. The piece also features a Croix de Guerre medal with a star, signifying that he was mentioned in regimental orders. The final item is Trinket's French identification bracelet, which was returned to his family after his death.
Did you find out how he passed?
Yes, he was apparently coming back with two other pilots, all flying their own aircraft.
These items hold significant intrinsic value even without their connection to the Lafayette Escadrille. For instance, a French flight helmet is valued at approximately $500. The trench art shell, due to its link to the French Foreign Legion, increases its value from $85 to $600 to $700. The Lafayette Escadrille Medal, awarded posthumously to those who served with the escadrille, is worth around $700. However, as a cohesive group, a collector might expect a retail price in the range of
Collector would expect to see a retail price on this somewhere in the neighborhood of $4,000 to $5,000.
Oh, very interesting.
This is an Imperial pilot's wing from World War I that belonged to the owner's grandmother's first husband, Yuri Vladimirovich Lee. He grew up in Russia with a foster family and eventually joined the Imperial Air Service, the precursor to Russia's modern Air Force. Notably, Yuri fought for the Tsarist side in the Civil War. At the time, and even today, Russia had a relatively large ethnic Chinese population. This was a result of Imperial Russia expanding its borders and absorbing territories traditionally considered part of China. This expansion often occurred amidst conflict. It's fascinating that Yuri found a level of acceptance in Russian society significant enough to allow him to be trained as an aviator.
We call the Red-White Civil War.
Yes.
There was conflict among the communists. There was conflict among the Tsarists.
Even more interestingly, he chose to align himself with the White Army. The White Army was a coalition of forces that opposed the Bolshevik Red Army during the Russian Civil War. The conflict within both communist and Tsarist factions, as well as among the ethnic Chinese in Russia, further complicated the era's political landscape. The badge in question is a 1917 military pilot badge from the Moscow School of Aviation for warrant officers, a graduation badge in essence.
So he, interestingly, never earned that badge.
Ah, cool.
But he acquired one.
Yeah.
You know, at some point, somehow, he acquired this badge.
Yuri entered the school in February 1918, but did not complete his training. By October of that year, amidst political upheaval, he was expelled, likely because he was unwilling to fly for the Bolsheviks. Interestingly, despite never officially earning the badge, Yuri somehow acquired it. He appeared to take great pride in it, as evidenced by a photograph in which he is seen wearing the badge on his civilian clothing after the war. Another photograph depicts him in flight gear, although not in a Russian uniform. After his exile while living in Harbin, Manchuria, Yuri joined the Chinese military and rose to the rank of colonel. The Imperial Russian badge is rich in symbolism. At the center of the shield is the iconography of St. George slaying the dragon, a motif extensively used by the Russian Empire. Above this is the Russian double-headed eagle, which features prominently on much of the empire's insignia. Below the eagle is the front end of an aircraft engine with a large propeller, identifying it as an aviation badge. Such badges are exceedingly rare. It is, in essence, a true collector's item, a unicorn in the realm of historical artifacts. This particular badge, appraised about 8 years ago at $2,000, would now be valued at a retail price of.
We are very firmly of the opinion that a retail price today would be between $5,000 and $7,000.
Cool. That's good to hear.
These posters, featuring captivating graphics, were acquired at estate sales over the past 20 years. The first is a renowned World War I poster aimed at recruiting men into the Tank Corps. The cat featured on the poster, named Black Tom, served as the mascot for the Tank Corps. The Tank Corps was a brand new division during the First World War, making this poster a significant piece of military history. Notably, the poster was produced in 3 different sizes, and this particular one is the largest. The second poster is from the Chicago World's Fair. What makes this piece stand out among other World's Fair posters is its inclusion of the original tube, complete with the authentic Chicago World's Fair sticker.
And that is that it comes with the original tube, which has the original Chicago World's Fair sticker on it.
The centerpiece of this collection, however, is the third poster, a stunning Japanese Art Deco design. This poster, created between 1925 and 1930, is in Japanese, which presents a unique challenge since the text is not easily understood. Nonetheless, one of the remarkable aspects of posters like this is their ability to transcend language barriers. The design features an extraordinary depiction of an airplane soaring over a Japanese peninsula. Additionally, although subtle, the ink used in this poster is gilt silver, enhancing its visual appeal. In terms of value, an auction estimate for the World War I poster is worth between $2,000 and $3,000. The Chicago World's Fair poster is estimated to fetch between $4,000 and $6,000 at auction. The best of them all, which is the Japanese Art Deco poster, despite the language barrier, is clearly identified as promoting the Kanazawa exhibition.
Now we're talking.
Let's get this in the back.
At auction, this poster is estimated to be worth between $5,000 and $7,500. In total, the value of these 3 posters is estimated at
The value of these 3 posters to a total of $11,000 to $16,500.
Perfect.
The guest came across this fascinating metal-bodied instrument adorned with a beautiful picture in an antique shop. What makes this piece far more unusual than a typical instrument is that it falls under the category of trench art. Trench art gained significant popularity during World War I. It was often crafted by convalescing soldiers who were wounded and needed something to occupy their time during recovery. Most trench art pieces encountered are decorated artillery shells, small bullets, cigarette lighters, or cigarette cases.
Dated September 20th, 1917, and then the man's name who more than likely made it. Apparently, he may have been a musical instrument maker before the war.
The instrument is dated September 20th, 1917, and bears the name of the man who likely created it. It's possible that he was a musical instrument maker before the war, given his apparent expertise in fabricating such a complex item from brass military casings. In recent years, trench art has grown increasingly popular among collectors. While it was purchased for $130, its value is estimated to be anywhere between.
I would estimate it $500, maybe $600, $700 for it.
A label from a peach can featuring a letter on the back from World War I is brought in. The front of the label is beautiful, resembling a piece of graphic art from the turn of the century. On the back, there's an indication of the individual who sent it, the date, and a censored mark. Another mark on the label is of a lieutenant in the 4th Infantry. His job was to review the letter and ensure that it contained no inappropriate information before being sent back home. But it's the back of the label that's truly interesting. The letter is from a soldier in the machine gun company.
The back is really what gets us interested in this piece, and we've got a letter from a fella here.
4th Infantry Regiment, one of the most actively engaged American divisions in World War I. Apparently, this soldier was quite taken with the peaches. In his letter, he writes,
He says, "Dear sir, here I am on the firing line at the bottom of a trench, having just finished my day's rations of corned willy and hardtack, and having finished it all off by eating this can of peaches from your firm." So clearly it meant a lot to him, enough to save the label and send it back. There's something else in here. They tasted so good.
Clearly, the peaches meant a lot to him, enough to save the label and send it back home. At the bottom of the letter, he signs his name, and again.
But he signs it, interestingly here, he says, "Believe me, they are worth fighting for. Your friend Eddie."
It's clear that this small gesture was deeply significant to him, given the harsh circumstances they were facing. Rations during World War I were far from luxurious. Soldiers were primarily concerned with 2 things: getting food to the front lines and ensuring it was nutritious enough to provide the necessary calories to keep them going. More importantly, they needed the food to withstand the journey from point A to point B without causing illness, avoiding contamination, spoilage, or the risk of botulism. Canned goods were particularly well suited to these challenges because of their airtight packaging.
So canned goods were particularly well suited to that because they're all wrapped up. In the realm of value, these labels...
In terms of value, these labels from fruit cans, crates, and similar items are often collected as decorative pieces. They're attractive as period lithographs, but on their own, this label would typically be worth about $10. However, as a memento so meaningful to this soldier that he wrote a heartfelt letter and sent it home, this piece takes on far greater significance. As a document of frontline life for an American soldier in World War I, this label would likely have a retail value today in the range of
Retail value today for this in the neighborhood of $550 to $600.
Wow.
This is the guest's grandfather, Wesley Winkler's helmet. He served in World War I in France from 1918 to 1919 as part of the engineers. A friend from his unit painted this commemorative design on the helmet at the end of his service.
Laverne?
Yes.
Minnesota, where he was from?
Yep.
There are all kinds of wonderful records that are available today. They're all online.
A little research on Wesley Winkler reveals that he was from Luverne, Minnesota. He went overseas in June 1918, returned in June 1919, and served with the 55th U.S. Engineers, as indicated on the helmet. The 55th Engineers were a standard gauge railway construction unit, primarily responsible for building the rail systems that transported supplies from depots to the front lines. Over the years, thousands of painted World War I helmets have surfaced, but this is arguably the finest example ever featured on the show. What makes this helmet particularly appealing is its exceptional artwork. Many painted helmets from the era feature simple unit insignias that soldiers wore after the armistice while serving in the Army of Occupation.
What appeals to us on this helmet, a lot of them are done simply with a unit insignia to wear, so that is something that would have been done after the armistice that they would wear during the Army of Occupation. Some of them that are a little bit more elaborate were done as souvenirs, either over there or on the ship on the way home.
Others, which are slightly more elaborate, were created as souvenirs, either while still in Europe or during the voyage home. This helmet falls into the latter category, but is leagues above most in terms of quality and detail. The artwork on the helmet's front depicts a vivid combat scene, showing soldiers going over the top of the trenches. The helmet also bears Wesley Winkler's name and unit, which is relatively uncommon. The design includes the American flag rendered as a banner on the front and back, a rising sun, an eagle, and the detailed trench combat scene. The quality of the artwork far surpasses what is typically seen on such helmets. It's important to note that in recent decades, professionally painted World War I helmets have been produced overseas.
See a really, really nice one these days, you have to be especially careful because starting even 20 years ago, there were some professionally done helmets that were coming in from overseas.
These modern reproductions, while not intended to deceive, feature premier-level artistry and can be mistaken for originals. However, this helmet stands out as one of the finest examples ever encountered, with a retail value estimated at.
Comparing to some of the very nicest ones that I have seen and sold, this is a helmet that I would expect a retail value of $2,000 to $2,500.
Wow.
This is a World War I poster purchased approximately 20 years ago. It features the iconic two-headed eagle, a symbol of Russia since 1497, when Tsar Ivan III made it the official national emblem. Ivan III Vasilievich, also known as Ivan the Great, served as Grand Prince of Moscow and all Russia from 1462 until his death in 1505. The two-headed eagle in the poster is depicted holding two renowned symbols of power, an orb in one talon and a scepter in the other. Additionally, there are three crowns, one atop each eagle's head and a floating crown in the center, symbolizing unity. The two heads of the eagle face east and west, representing Russia's reach and unity as a powerful nation. At the center of the emblem is St. George slaying the dragon, an iconic image in Russian mythology. Below, the poster declares a call to action: war loan, 5.5%. The text beneath it, written in Russian, reads, "For the strength to hasten victory against our enemies."
This is a poster for the First World War, and they needed to raise money to fight the war. And so it says, war loan, 5.5%.
Under one wing of the eagle there is a trophy of arms, a timeless symbol of victory in battle. Under the other wing is a heavy-caliber World War I field gun. These elements emphasize the poster's purpose, to rally support and funds for Russia's war effort. Notably, Russian World War I posters were printed on extremely flimsy paper, similar to newsprint, as Russia was not a wealthy country at the time.
Russia was not a very rich country, and these posters were printed on incredibly flimsy paper, almost like newsprint. So many of them have begun to crumble, almost would turn to dust in your hands if you've picked them up.
Because of this, many posters have deteriorated over the years. However, this particular piece has survived in near immaculate condition, an impressive feat for a poster now over a century old. The poster dates to 1916, a year before the tumultuous events of 1917. That year, Russia experienced two monumental revolutions. The Second Revolution led to the Bolsheviks overthrowing the provincial government and eventually establishing the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, in 1922. Once the communist regime came into power, all Tsarist symbols, including the double-headed eagle, were banned. The eagle did not re-emerge as a symbol of Russia until after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Interestingly, the poster was printed in Petrograd, later renamed Leningrad. The designer of the poster remains unknown, humorously referred to as anonymous, though their work is prolific and recognized globally. Technically, the poster is a lithograph, a common printing technique at the time. Hence, this particular piece, featuring an image never seen before, could fetch between $1,500 and $2,000 at auction. On a good day, it might even sell for as much as...
Wow, that's wonderful.
This photograph depicts over 1,000 military personnel at the Great Lakes Training Center forming a living American flag. It is truly remarkable that so many individuals were coordinated to stand in formation, saluting and creating the flag, complete with the flagpole. In the lower right corner of the photograph, the name Mayhart Studio is visible, along with its location in Chicago and the date 1917. This year is significant because in April 1917, the United States entered the First World War.
Because in April of 1917, the United States entered the First World War.
The concept of a living flag became popular during this time, particularly in 1917 and 1918. Studios like Mayhart engaged in meticulous planning to create these images.
So photographers like the Mayhart Studio would engage in a lot of planning because look at the perspective of...
To produce such a photograph, it's likely that someone stood atop a tower, perhaps 60 to 70 feet high, using a megaphone to direct the participants. A closer look at the image reveals that each individual is standing at attention and saluting. This composition reflects a time when President Woodrow Wilson was deliberating the US's entry into a widely unpopular war. During this era, iconic images such as the American flag, President Wilson, the Statue of Liberty, and military emblems were frequently depicted in this living flag style.
So the idea that President Wilson was considering entering the United States in a war that was very unfavorable.
If this particular piece were to come to auction, it would likely be valued between...
An estimate would be $1,500 to $2,500.
I appreciate that because it does have sentimental value to us about 4 generations later.
This item dates back to World War I. It is a German Iron Cross taken from a German airplane. Unfortunately, it's impossible to determine the specific type of aircraft it came from, as there are no identifying features or clues in the material. One notable aspect of this piece is its distinctive camouflage pattern, known as lozenge camo. This pattern, unique to German aircraft, was introduced later in World War I and was used across several types of airplanes.
One thing I can tell you is that the camouflage pattern that you're looking at here is called lozenge camo.
Lozenge camo was a common sight, and whenever one of these planes crashed, Allied servicemen were often quick to cut pieces of the material into small souvenirs using pocket knives.
Rarely, though, do you find a great big complete panel with one whole wing insignia on it or fuselage insignia like you have here.
Many of these pieces are typically 5 to 8 inches in size. However, finding a large intact panel like this one, complete with an entire wing for fuselage insignia, is exceedingly rare. This is the kind of piece serious collectors desire. A panel like this is expected to have a retail value in the range of...
I would anticipate seeing a retail price for this in the neighborhood of $6,000 to $7,000.
Wow, that's amazing.
This archive contains the story of First Lieutenant John McClinton, a pilot who served and died during World War I. Hailing from Texas, this collection details his journey from the time he left America to the last 10 days of his life. McClinton primarily served as a photo reconnaissance pilot, tasked with flying over enemy lines to capture critical photographic intelligence. In his diary, he vividly describes what it was like to be shot at.
Basically, a photo reconnaissance. So in other words, in World War I, he was going over and taking pictures.
Well, he writes how it is to be shot at, how he can feel the wind blowing across his hair with bullets going across. Like the second flight he took, he crashed his aircraft.
McClinton was one of the early aviators from Texas and had been recruited into the Air Corps after college. He volunteered eagerly when the opportunity arose. Once deployed, McClinton spent a year and a half in Europe, primarily in France.
Well, he volunteered when they came down for him.
Then he went over to Europe.
He went to France.
Tragically, his service ended when he crashed his plane and died in a dogfight. His story is preserved in a 2-volume handwritten diary, a day-by-day account of his experiences. These entries offer fascinating insights into the challenges of early aviation and the realities of war. Unlike many military diaries that can feel monotonous, McClinton's writings are immersive, giving readers the sense of being in the cockpit with him. The collection includes 2 volumes of his diary, one still bound and the other showing signs of wear, both filled with rich details. There is also a photograph of McClinton taken in France. In keeping with wartime customs, his body was buried immediately after his death, as preservation was impossible. 3 years later, his remains were exhumed and brought back home. Additionally, this archive includes the propeller from his aircraft and a letter sent to his family informing them of his death. During World War I, many Americans joined the Air Corps, though most remained stateside. McClinton's decision to serve overseas adds significant historical value to this collection. The fact that he engaged in combat further elevates its importance. His skill as a writer enhances the narrative, making the diary particularly compelling. Most notably, McClinton was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, a prestigious military honor which further contributes to the significance of this archive.
And then, very important when we start getting to the value of this collection, is that he won the Distinguished Service Cross. I mean, that is a major, major medal.
Given its historical depth, personal detail, and the rarity of such artifacts, a conservative value of this collection is estimated at
is probably in the $5,000 to $7,000 on a $10 investment.
Yes, I'm ecstatic. I'm ecstatic.
The guest brought in a Prussian spiked helmet with a camouflage field cover. A spiked helmet can be quite ornate, but this particular one features a field cover designed to avoid attracting attention when worn in the trenches during the First World War.
This particular one has a field cover on it so that it doesn't attract too much attention when they're actually wearing them in the trenches in the First World War.
Upon removing the cover, there are remnants of numbers on the front, which at one time may have identified the unit of the original owner, assuming the cover was paired with this helmet. At first glance, the helmet appears to be an officer's piece, but it is not. Instead, it is an officer quality, enlisted private purchase helmet, likely acquired by a non-commissioned officer who chose to spend extra money on a higher quality item.
It looks, at first glance, like an officer's helmet. But it's not. It's an officer quality enlisted private purchase helmet.
The helmet has a Prussian front plate with additional identifying details located on the sides. On one side, the cockade indicates that the wearer was from Prussia, as it bears the Prussian colors of black and white. On the opposite side is a national cockade, as was customary at the time. Typically, helmets had the state cockade on the left and the national cockade on the right. Inside the helmet, there is an officer-style lining, including a leather sweatband and a silk interior. Interestingly, there is no maker's mark visible inside. However, what stands out are several death notices tucked into the lining.
Well, I'm not seeing that immediately, but I am seeing something that's a little more interesting.
These notices, likely clipped from local newspapers, announce the deaths of individuals from the owner's community who were killed in the war. The presence of these death notices suggests that they may have been friends or family members of the helmet's owner. The First World War was a devastatingly casualty-heavy conflict, claiming the lives of an entire generation in many countries, including Germany, France, Belgium, and England.
The First World War was a very casualty-heavy conflict, and a lot of folks from Germany and France and Belgium and England, they essentially lost an entire generation.
The death notices inside this helmet serve as a poignant reminder that while it is a remarkable and beautiful piece of militaria, it carries a heavy emotional weight. For a collector today, a piece like this would typically command a retail price in the neighborhood of.
A collector today would expect to pay a retail price in the neighborhood of $1,650.
Purchased at a flea market in Tulsa, Oklahoma, this is an airplane propeller that has been repurposed into a floor lamp. It's a remarkable example of modern design and looks even more impressive when illuminated. The lamp is massive, incredibly heavy, and stands approximately 46 inches tall to the base, with each of its shades measuring 15 inches. This piece is believed to have originated from a World War I bomber. During the First World War, we often see trench art crafted from airplane parts, such as boxes made from propellers. However, a floor lamp like this is incredibly rare. It is likely that the propeller was salvaged from an aircraft retired from service in the 1920s and then converted into a lamp during the 1950s.
We looked at the size of the base, the length of the propeller, and this piece is more than likely from a World War I bomber.
This aligns with the trends of the mid-century modern movement, when such innovative repurposing became popular. One could speculate that the lamp was designed earlier and that the aesthetic of the propeller was ahead of its time. However, based on the way it's cut and assembled, it was almost certainly constructed in the 1950s.
When you get into propellers, they're all marked on the hub, which would have been great if we could have had that, but unfortunately we don't have it.
Typically, propellers are marked on the hub, which would have provided more specific information about its origins. Unfortunately, in this case, the hub is missing or unmarked, so the best conclusion is that it came from a large World War I aircraft. Interestingly, the design appeal of this piece makes it more valuable to a mid-century modern collector than to a militaria enthusiast. A conservative auction estimate for this unique lamp would range between
Would be between $2,000 and $3,000.
Wow, that's amazing. I said it. That is amazing.
Found in the estate of a Canadian Member of Parliament, this is a set of Toby jugs.
Toby jugs originated in the late 18th century, and they were usually satirical or comical depictions of famous literary, political, social characters.
Toby jugs originated in the late 18th century and were typically satirical or comical depictions of famous literary, political, or social figures. This tradition has continued to the present day. These particular jugs represent various political and military leaders of the Allied forces during World War I, with each jug showcasing distinct characteristics of its leader's country and military forces. The first example depicts Foch, a French military leader. The marks on the bottom indicate that it was made by the Wilkinson Company, one of the well-known Staffordshire pottery manufacturers. Additionally, the name of the retailer in London where the jugs were originally sold, along with the designer's signature, is also present. These jugs are exceptionally well designed and crafted, all hand-painted with incredible detail, which significantly enhances their value.
There's a lot of sloppy, ugly, poorly made Toby jugs, but these are so well made and so interesting and so colorful.
These Toby jugs are not only fascinating and colorful, but also quite rare, especially in the United States. While they appear occasionally in England, their scarcity adds to their appeal. However, a few of the pieces in this set have minor condition issues that slightly affect their value. For example, one jug had its handle broken off at some point, later reattached and repainted. Naturally, such repairs impact the overall value. Despite these minor flaws, the set is estimated to be worth between
$4,000 and $6,000, which is really a nice amount.
Wish my grandfather was here to know how well he'd done.
Yeah.